Hey everybody, John Wood here, and I'm coming to you from beautiful Billings, Montana. I want to do another video for you today. This time I want to do a fly that was featured in Fly Tyer magazine, the autumn 2021 issue. You can find it on the back cover, and on page 43 is the recipe here, and you can see it's similar to the scimitar minnow, only I've added some marabou to the body and a tail on it. Get a better look at it here. This is a bass fly that I came up with several years ago while fishing a pond in Bonham, Texas. A private pond with some really good bass in it. And these bass like to get in the trees, these submerged trees, and they were hard to get out with different flies. So I started working on weedless flies, and I had already developed the scimitar minnow, and then came up with this because I wanted something with a bigger silhouette to it, and this is what I came up with. So I've added the tail, like I said, the marabou and some polar chenille, and this tail has got a contrasting tip on it, and I want to show you how to do that before we start tying the fly itself, because it's a bit of a different process. I used to just glue these things on right here using super glue, but I found that once the leather gets wet, it starts to swell and the glue would release, and then after about an hour, hour and a half of fishing, the hot spot would fall off, so you're just stuck with a straight zonker strip. Now I use this on a lot of different patterns, this contrasting tipped tail, because I think it gives the fish a better target. I'm going to start with a 2.5 inch long strip of, in this case, purple. And this is a Hairline product. It comes in the full, I buy them in the full skins instead of just the small packages. It's just a much better value for tying a lot of flies. So this is a 2.5 inch long, and it's measured right along the skin surface. So when you look at the overall length, it's actually going to be a little over 3 inches because of the length of the hair. And the tip is again, measured along the skin side. It's about 3/4 to 1 inch, and you can vary that however much you want to, depending on what the look is that you're going for. So we're going to need a base to tie this on, and I am going to use a sewing needle. It's just that simple. I just take a sewing needle, clamp it in the vise, and I keep this stored in this little piece of foam so I don't lose it in my drawer of tools, and I don't poke myself when I'm hunting around for it. So I'm just going to take my strip, and I'm going to tie this on to where the ends are pretty much even. So I'm going to look at these and even that up, pinch that down, and then I can get an idea of where I need my foundation for tying. And I'm just going to separate that hair right there where it needs to be separated. And to help with that, I'm using a little moisture off of a sponge cloth that I keep in a little Tupperware tub there. And it just makes things a lot easier to work with. Try not to get too much moisture at this point on the leather, because it makes getting the needle in there a little tougher. Just try to get that hair groomed out of the way so you can see where you need the foundation and where you need to start your needle. So with what will be the back of the tail pointing away from the vise, I've got my separation there where it's parted. I'm going to just press that leather right up against the needle and just slide it through the top surface. It's a little tricky not looking at it. I usually do it with the leather pointing upward, but I need you to see that. There we go. And I've just run it through the top surface of the leather. And the end of the needle is about right there. You can see where the part is, and that's as far as you need to go. But I am going to just, for grins, pull it a little further in there. There we go. Now for the thread, I'm going to use the same thread that we use on the body of this fly, this Stump Slider, which is a red 6/0 uni thread. And I've got the thread. I'm going to drop it right here. Bring my finger up underneath there. And then I can use my thumb to pinch the thread down on top of the leather and the pin, the needle that I'm using. Now I'm just going to make, you see I spiraled forward and then brought the thread up in the middle of that part. I'm going to make 1.5 loose turns right there, and then line that back up because I want it to stay right up on top of the needle. And now I'm going to bring my index finger in there and my thumb on top, and I'm just going to pinch down really hard to keep that from rotating, and make about 5 or 6 wraps. And you want them to kind of stack up on top of each other. They are inherently going to fall forward and backwards, but we want them to stay, we want a really small footprint, as small as we can get. Now here's my tip, and I'm going to moisten it also, just enough again to get the hair, the fur, under control. Now I'm going to take the end of that and place it just to the vise side of where my thread is by about 1/16 of an inch, and then drop my thumbnail down on top of it to hold it in place. And do the same procedure. Take one loose wrap, and as you come back around, tighten it up and pinch it in place. And then 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6 wraps. That is all you need. Moisten that one more time. Now to whip finish this, you can use a whip finisher, but it takes a pretty gargantuan whip finisher to get around that fur. So I prefer to do these by hand. And I'm going to do the same thing. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6 wraps. That's all we need. 6 wraps. Get that last wrap tightened up right there on top of your whip finish. Make sure it's really, really snug, and trim it with a little bit of a tag. Then you can come in and trim your other tag and leave those tags on there. It just kind of, for me, it's just a little mental assurance. I don't think it really makes any difference in the actual fishing. So before I pull this thing off of here, I'm going to spin it around and take my handy dandy eyebrow mustache brush and just kind of brush everything in place so that it's nice and pretty. And I'm going to get any extra under fur out of there, as I just hate that stuff flying around and getting up my snout while I'm trying to tie these things. So this thing, believe it or not, is extremely secure, because once this gets wet and that leather starts to swell, it actually tightens down on the wraps and the whip finish. And I have fished several of these flies in different patterns where the tail outlasts the rest of the fly. Now that shouldn't be the case with this one except for the Marabou, but other than that, this fly will fish for, if you don't lose it, for a year, maybe 2. They're extremely durable. So to get that off of there, just grab it by the wraps and the whip finish and slide it right off. I'm going to put a little moisture on here to contain it. and there you see, that is your tipped tail, in this case, for the Stump Slider. I also use this on a fly called the Emotion Detector, and sometimes attach these tips on the tail of the topwater cat burglar flies. So that's our tail. I'm going to put my needle back into the piece of foam, just slide it in there, so easy to find, and I won't poke my fingers. Alright, now when I wrote the article, I was tying these on a, where'd it go? Umpqua U502 hook. And that's a big heavy hook, but I have since discovered the X series. Actually, the X series wasn't even out when I first started tying these. And I love these X series hooks because of the shape and the depth of the throat and the wide opening right here, and the fact that the point goes downwards towards the eye, so when you set that hook, you've got a more direct hook set. This thing's got a micro barb on it, and it penetrates beautifully. You can even smash that barb down and you can still catch bass without having to worry about them throwing it, because there's enough of a bump right there that it will catch once it penetrates. And it actually penetrates a little bit better with that barb smashed down. I'm going to put this in the hook and the vise here. Snug that up in my little Renzetti master vise. And we're going to add some weight. Now, I do not like this fly to fall fast. I like it to fall slow. I want it to have a really slow pulsating sink rate. I think that it actually is more enticing to the fish when they see that falling slow. Now, as I'm weighting it, it will sink to about 4 to 5 feet on an 7.5 to 9 foot leader, fishing it really, really slow. And it's actually meant to imitate the same kind of action that you would get with a Texas rigged rubber worm, which when I fish those, I like them to move really, really slow in the water. I don't want them plummeting to the bottom. Now, if you want to get to a deeper depth, instead of adding weight, more weight to the hook, I like to fish them either on a sink tip or a full sinking line with a 6 to 7 foot leader. And what that allows you to do is that line gets down there really fast, but your fly, once it gets down, once it's pulled down by the line to the depth that you want to fish it at, it's still going to have a really lethargic looking movement. Instead of being heavily weighted and having a heavy sinking line, you get down there to a depth, your fly is still going to sink like a rock, and it's not going to look as natural. So don't overweight these things, and use a sink tip or sinking line to get them down to the depth that you want to fish. You're going to get much better action, and I guarantee you, you're going to get a lot more strikes. Okay, for the weight on this thing, I'm going to use a product called Channel Lead. And this is a product from Cascade Crest Tools. This is the medium size, and this is an awesome product. I like it better than lead wraps because it's so quick to use. You can see I've got a point cut on the end of that, and I'll show you where that comes from as we trim it. Now I'm going to start my thread about 1.5 hook eye lengths back behind the eye, not quite 2, and get the thread started, and then spiral back just to the bend of the hook, and then spiral back to about 1/3 back from where we started. Now this channel lead is a little bit narrow, so what I do to prep it so it goes on the hook is I take my heavy bodkin and press it into the channel. Now I've already done that, so you can see when I get it to that wet, if I can get that back in there we go. I can just take that and drop it down on there, and I want the point even with where I started my thread, and now I can press that down on that thread really easily. And because I've got those thread wraps on there, this is very secure. It doesn't want to slide around. It's not going to rotate as much, so it's easier to handle. And I'm just going to take some really snug thread wraps and just cover that all the way to the point. And then come back and do the same thing going backwards. It doesn't have to be covered completely, but I do like it pretty much covered up. And I'm going to stop short of the bend of the hook with my thread, and then reach in here, and I want the scissors to intersect the top of the lead right where the bend of the hook starts, and just clip it. And now you see I've got my point for the next fly. I'm just going to press that down on there, and then wrap and secure that back end. Now if you want, you can come in here and put a layer or a coat of head cement, or like Solaris UV bone dry or something like that, but I don't find it necessary. There's going to be enough materials on there, and they're colored enough that even if you do get into some water that's going to cause that lead to discolor, it's not going to show through. So I don't really worry about it. Now I've got my thread back up here to the point of the hook, and I'm going to take my zonker strip that we put the tip on, and I want to groom about the first 3/8 of an inch. I'll groom that fur forward away from the rest of it, and then I'm just going to clip it off. Now what that's going to do is going to help to make our attachment point a little more secure, because with that hair on there, it does tend to slide back, and I've had a couple of those that got pulled out when fish grabbed the tail and they didn't grab the entire fly. You set the hook and it comes back without a tail. Since I started doing that, just that one little step of cutting the fur off, no problem. No need for super glue. Just a little bit of tricky handling of the material will do it. And this rough surface right here also helps. So I'm just going to start that, get it snugged up, and then just wrap it all the way. So now I'm at the end of the lead, but I want this tail to come a little bit more out of, not like along the very bottom of the body. I want it to be a little bit more towards the center. So I'm just going to wrap, not too far, but just a little bit around that bend. There we go. And then just bring it right back up to even with the hook point. Now I want to put the rib on before I put the body material on, and this is a UV olive polar chenille. And you don't need to get hung up in these colors. If you have a color scheme that you like, just change these colors up however you want. This is just a color scheme that really works for me in a lot of different lakes. This is also a pretty good trout streamer too, where you've got big trout. Believe it or not, this purple with the white tip is pretty exciting to them, and any of you guys that are steelhead fishermen, this is an awesome color. Now for the body, I am using a Cascade Crest Tools New Age Chenille, and this is in Winter Run Purple. You can find all of the materials listed in the recipe there in the beginning while you're listening to that awesome music written and performed by my son Steve. So I have stripped just a little bit off the tip of that chenille, strip the fuzz off of it. I'm going to catch that in there. Let's do that a little bit better. There we go. Catch that in and then wrap it again right back to where we secured the tail and the ribbing. And then I'm going to bring my thread back forward, and I'm going to stop about one more hook eye length back from the front of the lead. And that's going to be the space where we wrap the marabou that shrouds the body. I'm just going to wrap that on there real good. I want it snug. You don't want it moving around on you. And it's going to take several wraps because this is a size 2 chenille and it's not very big. But I really love the coloration in it. And I also love the fact that it's not extremely dense, so it absorbs water quickly and it sheds water quickly when you're false casting. So you're not casting that extra weight that's sucked up in the chenille like you would with a really dense chenille. And you're also not having to fight a dense chenille holding air and keeping your fly from sinking at the rate that you want it to. Okay, so I'm right back up to where my thread is, and I'm just going to catch that in there with one thread wrap over, one in front, one behind, one in front, one behind. Now that's a sequence I use a lot because it locks materials down very securely without a lot of thread wraps. I'll give it a couple over that just to finish binding it, and now I'm just going to spiral wrap this forward. And these wraps are open about the thickness of our chenille body. So that's going to allow me to get about 5 wraps on here, and it varies depending on exactly where you stop your body. So don't get too hung up on that. Again, I'm going to use the same procedure, but this time I'm going to go pull everything back, and I'm just going to do that twice, get a couple extra wraps, and now when I cut this, I'm going to give a little bit of a stub right there, and that is what I'm going to use to bind that down securely to make sure it's not going to go anywhere. Wrap to the front of your lead with your thread and then come back to the back. I'm going to take a little moisture because it helps and just kind of stroke that polar chenille back a bit. Just control it a little bit so it's not getting in our way so much. So for the marabou, what you want is a nice fluffy marabou feather, but I want to show you the difference between this one and this one. Now if you look at the one on your left, you're going to see that the barbs are a little bit finer, and the one that was on your right, and now the only one up there, you see how fuzzy those barbs are? Well, that gives you a lot more action and silhouette, but the problem with that is these barbs are very delicate and they break very easily. They break from the stem very easily because that feather is very, very mature and it's getting ready to eventually molt. But you can see how easily those barbs break. Where with this feather, the barbs are going to have a lot more structural strength. You're not going to have as much breakage on it. And your fly is going to last longer and you're going to be able to keep that shred on there longer. So I don't need the whole feather because we only need like 4 to 5 wraps. I'm going to take just a little bit of moisture, just barely, on my material hand and just a little bit on my bobbin hand and just kind of groom those out away from the stem. I want them to come down and we're going to separate that. We're going to make a part. Now from that part, here's what I've found. If I set that part right at the back of the hook band and then clip this just a little bit longer, then the eye of the hook, I've got the right amount for the wraps that I need. And you can see that's not a whole lot of feather. You don't want that shroud too thick. You want it to be kind of light. The more you put on there, wrapping it the way we're going to wrap it, the less movement you get out of it. Now I'm just going to pull just a few of those. That's just enough so that I can grab the end of that stem with my hackle pliers. I'm grooming it to get that part really definite, and that'll keep all the barbs out of the way when we're tying it in. Now I'm going to set that to where that part is right up towards, but not off the end of that tapered thread base that we've got over the end of the lead. With my thread back against where everything else was tied in, where the chenille and polar chenille were tied in, I'm wrapping up to the part of the barbs. Then I'm going to wrap backwards again, and then fold this over and groom those barbs back and catch that in like that. And that's going to add an unbelievable amount of strength to that you wouldn't think this delicate feather has, but it's going to make your fly a lot more durable. Now I'm just going to take my hackle pliers. Now I like these rotary hackle pliers for doing this. And everything was groomed away from the tip. Now I want to groom it perpendicular to the stem towards the back of the fly. And I'm just going to wrap it just about like you would the hackle on a dry fly, with the stem touching the previous wrap as you come around. Don't be afraid to put a little more moisture on there. Just don't soak the feather so much that it mats on you. And you're going to see that we're going to end right before the end of where the lead stopped. Be sure and keep a lot of pressure on your thread as you lock that down, because the stem is a little bit stiff and it wants to unwind if you don't. Snip what you've got left and bind it down very securely. Do not go backwards beyond where you caught the end of that Marabou stem, because we don't want to compress it against the body. We want it to be able to move out away from the body. And then just bring your thread just about 3 or 4, maybe 5 thread widths in front of where the end of that lead is. You could see I've still got about a little over a half of an eye width of length open on my shank. Now I'm going to take my brush, and I'm going to use the brush side. Make sure that there are not a bunch of tangles in that Marabou. We're good there. Now I'm going to take some moisture, and I want to groom everything up and back, because in our next step, when we're building the shoulders on this with the CCT fibers, I want to have everything out of the way when it comes to the point when we're trimming, and this is the best time to prepare for that. So with quite a bit of moisture on my fingers, I'm brushing that up and back. I want all of my polar chenille fibers and my Marabou out of the way. I want them to be completely out of the way. And once I get that and everything is contained really, really well, we're going to flip the hook in the jaws, and I'm going to get that as close as I can to that zonker strip. Just be careful not to pinch everything right there, because you don't want to clamp on your materials and cut them. Those jaws are very sharp and they will cut right through it. And for the body of this fly, we are using Cascade Crest CCT fibers. This is an awesome fiber that I use for a lot of different flies. I really love this stuff. And let me show you a couple things about it that make it so user friendly. Number one is the cost. This hank, obviously not this one because I've already hacked some pieces off of it, but a hank like this, which is about 80 small bundles that are 14 inches long, gathered at the center with that zip tie, is $3. That's a lot of flies right there for $3, especially when you're using it. I use this a lot for small trout flies for different applications, like the graveyard betas. So here we've got all these little bundles, and each one of these little bundles has got one binding wrap around it, and that's what keeps them separated. And I want you to remember that. I'm gonna show you how to deal with that in just a minute. But I can take these bundles and just say at this point on this fly, I'm gonna use 2 bundles. Clip those off, and I know exactly how much material I have taken off of that bundle. And so I am able to control the sink rate of my fly, the bulk of my fly, and the action of the fly without having to guess how many fibers I'm pulling out of a giant bundle like some of the other brands of fibers like this. So on this one I'm using 2 small bundles of pink, 3 bundles of red, and 3 bundles of purple. Now you'll notice the difference between the pink and the purple. The binding wrap has been groomed off of the purple. So I'm going to show you how to do that with the pink fibers. And to do that, you need a nylon bristled brush. You can use a toothbrush, but it has to be an extra stiff toothbrush because you need these bristles to be really stout. This is a grout brush that you can get at just about any home improvement store, and it's used for cleaning up grout, obviously, because that's why it's called a grout brush. So all I'm going to do is I'm going to securely grab this in my left hand. Then I'm going to take my right hand and use the brush, starting at the very end, and brush that binding wrap off. Now this is a little bit easier if you do it on a surface, but I want you to be able to see what I'm doing and see. I just work that binding wrap right there down off the end of the bundle. There we go, and you saw when it let go. Now all of those are going to move, all those little fibers are going to move independently instead of being bound as a bundle. Now I said it's easier to groom these things against the surface. What I like to do is just grab it securely and hold it against my pant leg and just do that same brushing motion. And having that pant leg as a backing, you can also use for a while I used an old mouse pad. That worked really, really well. Once you get one end brushed out, brush out the other end, and you're ready to go. It's just that simple. So now we have 3 groups of fibers. We've got the pink, which is 2 bundles, and I'm going to secure that by looping it around the bottom of the hook and then even up the ends. Put some pressure on my thread and then put pressure on the fibers and pull back just a little bit as you come around, and you can see where I'm at. I am just below the point of the hook, and I'm going to wrap this really snugly back to where I secured the Marabou. Do not go beyond that. That is your stopping point. Make that wrap and then drop it back forward right off the end of where you secured those. Now what you're going to get, I'm going to make an adjustment here with my thumbnail, is a V. the material is sitting on there in a V. You've got two distinct groups of material on either side of the hook shank on the upper surface, and they're sitting at about the 1 and 11 o'clock positions on the hook. For the other two bundles, we're going to secure them a little bit differently. I'm going to take the end of this group of 3 bundles of, sorry, not the purple, I'm going to use the red. Even it up on this back end towards your vise, and then with it on my side of the hook shank and on top, just going to make one wrap, keep that pretty tight, and then put a little tension on that group of fibers, pulling them back and towards you, keeping them right on top of the pink fibers that we applied in the previous step. And you want them on your side of the hook, but up on top at that 1 and 11 o'clock position. To get the other side, I've got my thread back up to where my bundle was secured originally, and I'm going to pull the bundle down, bring my thread around behind it, and then pull that bundle back up. And what that does is it locks it on the opposite side of the first bundle that we put up on top. And then you can secure it right next to it and bring your thread right back to the front of the hook, and you can see what that looks like. We're creating a V up there, and that's going to be a foundation for the bucktail that we're going to put on there to sit on top of. Now the purple is going to be secured in exactly the same way the red was. Lay it on top of the red on my side of the hook. Get it snugged in with a little pressure. Pull the fibers back, keeping them on my side of the hook shank right up on top. And then spiral the thread back to the beginning. Lock that bundle on the other side with that one wrap, and then bring it up beside the other bundle and secure it in place completely, and then lock that down. And I'm covering all of the binding area, making it nice and smooth for the hair to sit down on, because we're going to want that hair to move whenever we tie it on there. Now to trim this, or before I trim it, I want to groom these fibers a bit. So I'm going to use my comb side of my eyebrow mustache brush comb combo and just groom those. I'm going to pull that around so I can see what's going on here. And I want definite layers in there, but I still want them to blend together a bit. There we go. And you can see what we've got. Now I'm going to cut a little bit of the length off of here because it makes it a little bit easier to do that final trim. Because with that excess weight that's back here, when I turn it upside down to cut it, it wants to pull them downward, which right now that's lifting. But you can see once I turn that over now, if I had that excess weight on there, those fibers would be way down here. They would be at a completely different angle. So I've got that down there. I'm just going to push my scissors up onto that without cutting. Get them at the angle that I want, and I want it to be back behind the hook shank, and then just cut. Oop, there we go. And that is the angle that you want your CCT fibers cut. Get any stragglers, and there you go. Now, to put the bucktail on there, I want to tilt that back a little bit. Not a whole lot, just a little bit. When I'm tying the scimitar minnow, I tilt it back a little bit further, but with this stump slider, the Marabou tends to get in the way. And I am going to groom that one more time to get it out of the way just a little bit. Now, to aid in the tying on this, and I don't like to use super glue a lot, but in this case, it really helps to keep this hair on there. And it's one of the things that makes this fly so durable that you can catch dozens and dozens of fish without it falling apart. And I like to use the Gorilla Glue Super Glue Gel. Now, before you use this stuff, shake it up real good. And then before you take the top off, shake it downward and get that thick gel down into the spout. There we go. And I'm going to use just a little bit, but I'm not going to put it on there yet. I want to show you what we're doing with the bucktail. This is a light purple. If it was a darker purple, I would mix some of the purple in with the black in the center. But because this is so light, I'm just going to use black from the center of the tail. Get my scissors here. Separate a bundle out, and you want a pretty substantial bundle. I'll show you how much I've got once I get it cut. Clip that as close as you can to the leather of the tail. And then what I want to do is grab it about 1.5 inches from the end, and then I'm just going to groom most of the hair out with my comb there, and then with my fingers I'm going to be pulling out a lot of that hair. I don't want a ton of it, but you have to cut a big bundle so that you've got enough, because are a lot of really short hairs in there, and we don't want those because they'll create too much bulk at the tie-in point. So now that's what I've got. And I want the ends to be somewhat even, but not completely. So I'm going to get a little moisture on my fingers, and not too much. Get right out here at the tip and pull those out, and then realign those so that our end, it's not squared off, it's not completely lined up, but it doesn't have any really long straggling hairs coming off the front. Now, to align that, I want to grab this down here with my bobbin hand, and I want to have the ends of this hair just, a little over 1/4 inch longer than the CCT fibers. Once I get that lined up where I want it, pinch it here, and then I'm grabbing it with my thumbnail on the back side exactly where I want to cut it, which is just a little bit back behind the eye of the hook. I'll transfer this to my other hand, and I know exactly where I want to cut it, and that's just right there. And now that I've got that cut, I'm going to put my super glue gel on there, and it is just a dab. That is it. There is not a lot on there. If you put too much, you're going to end up gluing your finger to your fly. Not fun. I've done it before. Alright, now I have lengthened that out a little, the butts of those, pulled them out a little bit away from my fingers so that I've got something to attach to, and I'm going to kind of just drop that down, and you can see how far back I am from the eye of the hook, and make 2 loose wraps around that. Pull all of those hairs right back up on top, and then I'm cocking my right hand and bringing them down so that they go around on either side of the hook shank just a little ways. And that's going to allow me to cock those at the angle that I want them to be. Now I'm going to grasp it really tight with my material hand, and rather than pulling down on my bobbin, I'm going to snug it and come up, and when I got my thread up is when I put the pressure on. And do that 3 or 4 times, and that helps to keep from walking the hair around the hook shank. If you put pressure on that thread as you come around this way, your hair is going to walk around the hook shank really badly. Now once I've got that secured, you see when I got right to the end of the hair, the thread wants to fall off. So now I'm going to fill this gap right here, and that is the reason that we left that gap. If I had brought the hair all the way up here right behind the eye of the hook, my thread would want to start falling off beyond the eye of the hook. And now I'm just going to bind. Again, do not go back behind or beyond the point where your marabou was tied in. You can see this marabou is still pointing straight down right there. If I went any further back, it would press that marabou up against the fly, and I don't want that. I want it to be able to open up when it's in the water. Now, I'm going to cock that up just a little bit by pinching it at the back and pulling it up, because I want that hook, the hook point, buried behind all of that stuff. Because we don't have a lot of weight on this fly, just this amount of CCT fiber and that small amount of bucktail make this fly practically, or I hesitate to say 100%, but it's a good 95 to 97% weedless. You can swim this through just about anything, because the lack of excess weight allows the fly to be deflected by just this little bit of material when it's got the water in the fibers. And that's one of the things that makes this fly so awesome, is that you can swim it through just about anything. I'm just going to whip finish now that we've got everything in place. If I can figure out how to get that to work. There we go. Gotta be smarter than your tools. Now we're going to set the eyes on this, now that we've got the body in place. And on this one, we are going to use these holographic silver 8mm eyes. It's a pretty big eye, and I like that, especially in the pond that I developed this in and lakes that I've fished it in. The big eye seems to do quite a bit better than if you put a smaller eye on there. And I think it's because it gives the fish a good target. Now, I sell these on my website, and they're relatively inexpensive, especially compared to other brands out there on the market. They're about half to 2/3 of the price of what you'll pay for a big name brand on these eyes, and they're the same, I think, actually a little bit better quality. I really love these eyes. A friend of mine, Nick of Nick Fly Fishing, has got a couple of scimitar minnows with these eyes on them that he's been fishing for almost 2 years now and catching fish on a regular basis. So to glue these on, we're going to use the Gorilla Super Glue Gel. Now these do have an adhesive back, and for a while I was just putting them on with that, but they weren't quite as durable, even though we're going to fill them with Solaris in just a little bit. They just weren't as durable, but that tiny little dabble, again, like doing the bucktail, don't put too much. Put a little dabble on there. Press the eye in place. You want it right behind the eye of the hook. And the pupil just centered up with that triangle of the body. You'll be able to see it better on this side. Again, not a lot of super glue. And use the gel because it stays in place. The liquid just doesn't work as well. Now there you can see. Now I want to have these attached on here to where they're a little bit closer together at the front and a little bit closer together on the bottom than they are on the top. That creates kind of a wedge coming off of the eye of the hook, and that's another feature of this that makes these fly just a little bit more weedless. And these are things that it took me a long time to work out the details to get them just right. Once I get them positioned, well, that one slid. Let's get that back up there. There we go. I'm going to hold it in place just a little bit. Now you don't normally want to rush this process of filling these with the Solaris. I don't know that it makes a huge difference, but I just don't like to do it. I like for that glue to set up, but for the sake of this filming, I'm going to go ahead and do it. And we're going to use a Solaris, and it's called Duro Finish. I hope you can see that, and I'm not putting it behind the fly. And it is a doming resin, and it's a combination of flex and hard. I was mixing this up by hand, doing a thin hard and flex formula. If you don't want to spend that and you've got those, spend the money for this, and you've got those two around, you can just mix them 50-50 and they work exactly like this. But I love having it in this bottle with this applicator tip. I'm going to clean that tip because I think it bubbled on me. There we go. Now, I want the surface I'm filling to be pretty level, and I'm just going to work that down into the tip. There we go. And one thing you want to remember when you're building large quantities of this on your flies, the depth of this gap between these eyes is pretty thick, and you don't want to try to do it in one step because it just doesn't want to cure as well. And another thing that you want to remember about using Solaris is, now I've had some online discussions with people about this, you can overcook it if you cook it too fast. Go and read the instructions on the Solaris website, and it will tell you, do not just hit that with your torch close, hot, and for a long time. You're going to create problems with your resin. It won't set up right. You can have durability problems, yellowing, cracking, crazing, shrinking. Go at it slow. Give it one shot for 1 second from about 10 to 12 inches away. Then wait 10 to 15 seconds. Come in at about 8 inches and hit it again just for a long second and a half. And then let it rest. Well, while that's resting, I'm going to flip this over and we're going to do the same thing. Again, don't try to fill it all at once. I'm only going to fill half the depth. And I say this because I did a lot of experimenting. When I first started doing these type flies with these heads like this, I would just fill that baby up and cook it. And then you look at it later on, and there's a big air gap in there, and that made the eyes susceptible to coming off. When I started following the instructions on the Solaris website of taking my time curing the resin, it eliminated almost all the problems I ever had with this. The only problems I ever have with this anymore is when I get in a hurry. The other thing you want to remember about your Solaris is always use a fresh battery. If you're using these resins and you're getting a tacky surface, it's almost always because your light is not strong enough, and that is due to the battery being not at a good near full charge. The other thing is, use the Solaris light for Solaris resin, and that goes for any brand of resin. Use the light that is intended to go with that resin. So I gave this a 1-second shot. I let it rest for about 10 to 15 seconds in between, and gave it another single-second shot, and let it rest again while I was doing that on the bottom. And now I'm cooking it completely with about 25 to 30 seconds. Now you don't want to go, I'm going to cook this at the end about 45 seconds. But I don't want it to be 100% cooked, cured, whatever you want to call it, before I put the next layer in there. When you cure that completely, the surface gets really hard, it loses all of its tack, and it does not grab the new layer of resin quite as well. So you want to leave it just a little bit uncured. And now I'm putting my second layer in. And you see with this applicator tip, I'm able to just kind of walk it back and forth, apply exactly what I need. And then you see when I hit it there for 1 second, it created the shape and it locked in that shape, so that's not walking anymore. It's not running and it's not dripping. It's staying right where it needs to. I'm going to hit it again. And then we're going to turn this over and do the top while that bottom cools. So what's happening when you overcook that, if you just like put your resin on there and hit it with the light, is you're curing it so fast that the molecules do not get to rearrange the way they are intended to. They move around too fast, and some get trapped in, for lack of a better explanation, in suspended animation. They are not allowed to take their final position. But by doing this, you're allowing them, the molecules, to arrange the way they need to. It's kind of like fiberglass. If you put too much hardener in fiberglass, the molecules move around too fast because of the heat that's generated. It's not the actual heat, it's the curing time. That curing time is too fast, and then you'll get a brittle fiberglass. It's the exact same thing with this resin. Just take your time, don't get in a hurry, and you'll have a much better product when you're done. Alright, now I'm going to just cure the heck out of this for a minute. I'm going to add a little bit more right in front of that Marabou, but I want this to be mostly cured before I do that. And I'm going to go through the exact same process again. I just want the throat on that thing to be a little bit deeper. There we go. Work that back. Alright. Now I'm going to go back to the top while that cures, or while it cools after hitting it with the light. And I'm going to mostly cure this top side and have a really good look at it and see if I want to dome it up a little bit more. Alright, hit that again. I do want to dome that up. I want my dome between my eyes to be a little bit rounded. So now you can see I've actually done 3 layers top, 3 layers bottom. And that fly is going to be way more durable than if I did that all in one layer. Because if I had done that in one layer, I would have ended up with a big air bubble between the eyes. And it makes it susceptible to that whole chunk of Solaris popping out. When a fish hits it, when you're bouncing it off rocks, when you're casting it and you hit a bridge piling or something like that, taking your time, doing this in layers, it does take you know, it is consuming more time, but you're going to turn this fly into something that is so durable that, like my buddy Nick, you're going to be fishing this fly for a couple of years from now, no matter how many fish you catch on it. Unless you're, I mean, let's face it, if you're fishing pike or muskie, then nothing's going to hold up to that, short of a hunk of steel. But for bass, trout, I've caught stripers on these things. Anything you're going to be catching with it, this fly is going to be super durable. Now I'm going to do some more curing on that after I'm done here, but I just want to let you know, after this is done, I like to coat these. For a while I was using bone dry, and it does a really, really good job, but I actually like, as my final coating, Sally Hansen's Hard as Nails. It's stinky. It takes a long time to cure. It's not completely cured until about 18 hours, but this stuff really is hard as nails. The combination of that Solaris doming resin and the Sally Hansen top coat is going to make this fly completely bulletproof. You will be able to fish it and catch dozens and dozens of fish off of this fly without it wearing out. Your Marabou is going to be the first thing to go, and the Polar Chenille will be the second, but the CCT fibers, the Bucktail, and the Zonker strip are extremely durable. You'll be catching a lot of fish with this fly. Now, don't get hung up on the colors that we use today. Use your own colors. Experiment. Fish it in the lakes and rivers where you fish, and just see what colors your fish like best. But this is a really killer fly that is just as weedless as a fly can get and still catch fish, but you don't have any kind of mono or wire weed guard that you have to build in there. This is an awesome little pattern. I hope you enjoyed the video, and I hope you tie some of these up and they catch a lot of fish for you. And until next time, peace, love, and fly fishing, my friends.